Dan Perez with Epsilon. And today, the topic we're really going to focus on today is the evolution of retail and media networks, specifically around identity and AI. So, and when we talk about that, um, I'll let my guest that needs no introduction introduce herself and kind of go through the topic. So, over to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Dan. I'm so happy to be here. And thank you to Brand Innovators. My name's Elizabeth Donovan. I've been in the space quite some time, a pioneer for creating the first travel media network through personalization. And that's a great topic that we're going to talk about today, as well as creating strategic sales teams and opportunities that are relevant through the path of purchase. So thank you for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with that being said, I think one of the things we want to kind of start with, and Elizabeth, I'd love your thoughts on this, is for Epsilon, our point of view is on identity and the role of AI and for retail and media network. It's these are critical must-haves, right? In terms of how do you think about reaching your most ideal consumers? How do you think about making sure that you're getting them at scale? How you're reaching them across all the digital channels, not just on-site, off-site, social, things of that nature. And then how do you really think about putting that into action? Because what we've seen in the last 3 to 5 years is this huge influx of retailers moving into this area. In the reality, they're publishers. So, and that's a new world for a lot of them. So I'd love your thoughts on kind of how do you think a lot of these retailers, and especially with a lot of the history you've done yourself in the space, really get started on that path?
Well, I'll start with it's been like the big boom since pre-COVID, right? We realize that brands, not only retail, commerce, they have a platform of loyalty members or they have this first party data. So I think that's really crucial to the success and why they're becoming advertising networks, kind of like media networks,
Mhm.
but also it is just media, right? When you think about it, it's a way to connect and utilizing your first party data through the consumer journey. And I think Epsilon really does a great job of that.
So, with that being said, one of the big things we kind of talked about on the onset is the identity piece, and we'll get into E in a second. So, for you, as we think through the identity piece, what do you think are the most critical components about identity? Because I think we've talked about this a lot, and I think the industry talks about this a lot, is what is the definition of identity? What does that actually really mean? And then how do you put it into place? And what challenges does that come with?
Well, when we think about identity, obviously we want it privacy compliant, making sure we're utilizing our first party data in a smart way so that we can reach the right consumers through that path of purchase. But it's really crucial to know who your audience is and how you're reaching them through that path of purchase and making sure that it's relevant. And when we get into this conversation a little more and how we're doing that in real time and what we like to call AI, but it's really strategic targeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we think about, and I completely agree with everything you landed. I mean, what would be helpful, and I think help bring it to life for a lot of the everyone joining us today is some like real life examples of identity. Like, what does it really do? How does it enable? You can talk about reach and frequency and efficiency and effectiveness, but what does that really do then for all the partners that the networks are now supporting for all their new clients? They're saying, "Hey, I want you to invest in my publishing network using my data," but how does that drive results for them?
When we're thinking about that, we're thinking about it one from the advertiser lens and also from the consumer lens. We're we're bringing out products on these networks. So whether it be a Kroger or Uber, right? So we're thinking about who that person is, where they are, and how we could influence and support them through that journey. And I think that Epsilon does a great job really supporting and putting those pieces together so you're hitting the right person at the right time and solving for what they're trying to do and where they are throughout that journey.
Yeah, if we could expand on that a little bit with some of the things you just talked about is I think one of the critical pieces in what we see in the marketplaces in general, it's really the, hey, I'm really going to try to support you on site, but that only gets you so much reach. And then how do you backfill that with offsite? Whether that's offsite, open web programmatic, social and stuff. I think one of the big challenges we're really seeing is retailers are having a real hard time connecting those dots and saying, hey, you came to my site, but then am I still investing on you in some of these offsite channels? And now I've overspent on you because I couldn't connect the dots.
Well, that's absolutely. So you're running on their owned and operated, and then you're taking it offsite, whether an advertiser is being retargeted. But then also, if you think about it, you could help, especially retailers, with that measurement to provide in real time and how to support them through that supply chain.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I could give an example. When I was at AccuWeather, we worked with a pharmaceutical brand, and this was like in 2016. So really early in the space of when we're thinking about audience segmentation and thinking about how we're identifying the customer. But we worked with another partner within a clean room to support cold and flu algorithms. So, how weather affects your health and how you can target them effectively by zip code. So, one, targeting them on their owned and operated. Two, then that offsite component is like, how do you measure that? And I think the industry is still focusing on that, and Epsilon's really driving into we're getting that measurement in place. And then three, the supply chain for it. So really meeting that customer and the consumer and focusing on where they are through that purchase. Are they on Bayer.com, or is Bayer running advertisements on NBC Universal, et cetera? So there's three-prong approach.
yeah, I think you hit on a number of critical things right there. And one of the ones you touched on is you're leveraging the data that you have, but then the real time signals
Mm-hmm.
to help enhance that. Because a lot of things, I think we think it depends on vertical, is that your data tends to be the gold standard because you'll see the transactions or you see the engagement. But if they haven't come to you in a couple months or haven't been to your store in a few months, to your point on cold and flu, hey, we're all as consumers, right? I'm not going to buy something like that till I think I need it. But to your point, there's those advanced signals that you can now start using to saying, how do I proactively start creating these communications message so that as a consumer, you're already got the awareness of when it comes, I know exactly where I'm going to buy it and how do I leverage and things like that. And we think that's really really going to make a big difference through that. Speaking of that, how do we think AI is going to help evolve that now too? Because like across, and we've all seen it across the board with every other panel is AI, right? In terms of how to do and stuff like that. But I think we've talked about in the past, AI's been here. We've been doing it for 15 plus years, right? So it's not this, hey, we hope to build it. It's an imperative to have. So how have you been thinking with your current sort of launching that?
When I'm thinking about AI and the importance of it is that personalization, knowing who that person is in a privacy compliant way, but focusing on what does that person need. So at my role at Marriott, when I was putting together the network, we're really focusing on meeting the person where they are throughout that travel journey. So say if you're within a hotel and you're supporting, you're in New York City, right? We know that you're in New York City, but you'll be served with something that's relevant, that's going to enhance your experience. And we know, just think about how great Uber and Lyft, when you're focusing on, we know your location, we know who you are, you booked your ride. And I was just in a Lyft coming here today, and maybe I want to see Madame Tussauds and get a 20% discount. I think that's really resonates because you're hitting the right person at the right time. But the way we're doing that, that's going to help with measurement. That's going to help with how we're supporting content. Mm-hmm. And I think to be able to, if we know someone already saw this message or they already purchased something, how great it would be to give them something else that's more relevant to them as a consumer.
And in your opinion, what do you think holds back a lot of retailers from doing that? Is it the fear of doing it? Is it the platforms? Is it, to your point, on a lot of these data points coming in? And because to your point, you've built a lot of these. Is it just the, hey, I don't know where to get started and I'm trying to do too much too fast?
I think you have to start out with a core goal. A lot of these networks and retailers, it's not their core business, right? So everyone needs alignment on how they're pushing forward with their goals, and the company has to align on those goals. So when you're thinking about how you're creating it, will it be omni-channel? Who are you partnering with? I think it's really important when you're picking your tech stack. who you're aligning with in a partnership standpoint, right? And essentially, how can this resonate with the customer and the overall customer goals? But mostly, the networks have to be aligned by they're highly matrixed organizations, and we're seeing that. I'm on the Ascendant Network Founding Council, and we're seeing this across the board, right? Nobody doesn't have these challenges. You have to get everyone engaged and supported within those goals, and then you're able to put out a product that's going to resonate. But you want it to enhance the experience and ultimately drive top line revenue in a curated way.
Yeah, and I think to your point, to add a little more to that, and maximizing the scale against those audiences that matter the most, right? And I think that's where the other piece we were kind of touching about, the identity is so critical, right? That in that it we see challenges in the marketplace where you're only reaching 10 to 15% of your file, and you're leaving 80% of your best customers, because either you've reached them and you don't realize it, or you're on channels that don't report back, like social partners and things like that.
Well, and to really touch base, there is a plethora of data out there, and you need to know how to make it actionable. That's actually going to support your making sure you're reaching the right person, but also how are you splicing it and putting it together, and how is it going to resonate, and why people would want to use them as audience targets or offsite advertising. I think that's where it comes to play with the networks, because they're focusing on they have their business, but when you're thinking about from an audience or identity standpoint, there's a lot of work to put in that, and it's a lot of investment, and that's why you'll need partners that could support you to do that. I don't really think anyone could do it on their own at this point.
Yeah.
From an in-house standpoint.
And do you start seeing that trend of more of these retailers thinking that they're going to start that way, in-house, doing it all myself, or is it a mix of both?
I think it's a mix of both, but I highly encourage reaching out to others who have done it before and doing it on a test scale, an A/B test scale, because if you have all this information and you want to do it in a privacy compliant way, you really have to think about which audiences you want to reach, what's the data that's going to resonate most, and then also how is this going to support dynamic targeting, real-time targeting, location targeting.
With all those things put together, I think the other big piece we haven't really talked about yet is measurement, and then how to set those expectations with your partners that are leveraging this solution.
Yeah, so I think retail media networks obviously have an advantage when it comes to measurement because they have that sales data, right? And you're able to get that ROAS. But it doesn't mean that others in the space, the commerce space, has an extreme, huge opportunity to focus on alignment with other partners that can provide more detailed reporting. And the industry, we're not there yet, but I know that's a major focus for the industry because this is so new. This is advertising 2.0.
Yeah, no, I think that's, we couldn't agree with you more, because I think we'd love to see a common currency on attribution, right? Because to your point, each retailer kind of puts on how I can measure it with the channels I'm supporting. It's one thing to think about, well, I have my on-site and I'm going to measure clicks.
Right.
Great, but clicks, as we all know, don't always equate to conversions. And then to your point, hey, I've got all these off-site channels that I'm leveraging, and then there's sometimes can be barriers to get that data back from those partners to be able to do that. So that's where I think you're exactly right, is how do you bring that common currency? Or if you can't,
I don't think there's going to be a common currency, but I do think there's going to be a collaboration between networks. Maybe there'll be a partner that has retail media network experience, but they'll align it with a commerce experience. So, for example, perhaps United will align with a company that has sales data like, I don't know, I don't want to give them too many ideas if they're in the room. I'll have to ask Richard Nunn to hire me then.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's right. I think the other big thing is to your point, I do think it's going to take cycles on the attribution, but just being more clear on what your attribution methodology is. because to your point, and you put these teams together, is that how do you then have these retailer teams that are then supporting their clients and saying, here's why we think you should continue to invest in this beyond what you've invested with me previously from a merchandising standpoint to now leveraging my network.
And these companies are highly complex because they have the partnerships in place that are not aligned to advertising. So how can they bring that full circle and make that additive to their solution is, I think, something that we're going to be focusing on this year.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one more thing on the on the attribution piece is that how do you recommend it that the teams then set those expectations with their clients, right? Because I think a lot of clients come into it and saying, to your point, I've got the gold standard, I've got the transactional data, I can see the conversions and stuff, but that doesn't always. And to your point, I think there's a lot more that goes into it that says you can have the best data and audience in the world, but if you're not reaching the right people or you don't have the right message, it's just not going to work. Because consumers' behaviors, consumers have now been trained. They know if they go to your site, they're going to get retargeting. They know if they get messages and they don't necessarily react right away, they're going to get another one. So how do you continue to advance that messaging strategy then to drive that performance?
Well, I think it's the dynamic targeting, making sure you're reaching the right audience, but also the networks are becoming more custom, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's more on-site activations, reaching people where they are, and I think that's critical because I'm not sure we're there yet with measurement, but there's a lot of companies coming out like Placer AI that could help you with like that mobile attribution to find foot traffic. So I think that's something that some commerce networks might find as very valuable in the industry because they don't necessarily have that data of that sales data back to them, but they know who the person is. And I think that's really important to share those messaging and making sure it's relevant and solving for something that the
Mm-hmm.
consumer needs or the brand what the advertiser it's seeking out to do.
Yeah. So if we kind of, knowing that we're running short on time, if we kind of recap kind of what we kind of reviewed, based on your expertise in the space, it's really, hey, all these things have to work in conjunction together. How do you create the right audiences? How do you make sure you're maximizing those audiences? How do you manage reach and frequency across your on-site and off-site channels and things like that? And then set those expectations on creative messages and next best offer and things like that. So as you see, to your point, the big push the last
Thank you for everyone for joining late. Just kidding.
you see the big push the last 3 to 5 years in the space. Where do you think it's going next? Where do you think the big things are going to be?
I think so. People are going to use the term AI so lightly, right? It's AI, but it's personalization, it's identity. But where we're going is a place where you're reaching consumer where they are. So whether it's on an airplane, whether and you're at the supermarket, you're really going to need those dynamic messages and those opportunities that are going to create an environment where you're solving for something. And you have to make sure that it's not NASCAR, it's actually supporting that person on where they are because that it affects the purchase journey.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've definitely talked about that and the importance of audiences and meta and message relevancy. But one of the things we talked about in our past too is that how do you break down some of the silos of the retailers and being able to say, hey, you're already working together with one part of my business, but I want to look at the total approach. Do you think we'll start getting there at some point?
I do. I think there's going to be a lot of co-branding efforts. I think the way these partnerships are going to be thought about in future states are going to be more strategic and say, well, as part of this, we'll collaborate with you, but we'll give you 10% of your investment within the media dollars or through audience offsite monetization. I think there's just much more that meets the eye, and that's going to really make these partnerships more fruitful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be an imperative too, as we talked about, right? Is that as we're seeing in the marketplace in general, is that there's only so many dollars to go around, and if I'm a brand working with you and says, I'm already invested in with your merchandising force. I've already done this for years. I already have JBP commitments. And now you're asking for more on top of it. Great. I love it. You're my partner. And to your point, you've got the gold standard. But
You also need first to market new products, new opportunity, and those are going to have to be at a certain level of entry, right? Yes, we have the standard partnerships, but maybe you'll get a new launch or a new activation. It could be an on-site activation. It could be through audio. It could be through CTV. I think that's where a lot of change is going to happen within the industry this year.
yeah, and I think that's what's exciting, right? Is that, to your point, is that we've just kind of scratched the surface on launching these things, and the marketplace is catching up quickly. The dollars are starting to be harder to get because our partners are saying, what am I getting out of this? Like, how is it really moving the needle in my business? Which goes back to the question on attribution. So I think it is going to be one of these things where those retailers that, to your point, have really thought through the full consumer journey, and actually back to the point we were talking earlier, is really consider themselves not a retailer in this aspect, but a media platform partner publisher, the ones that are going to break through. Because that's
Exactly.
there's if there has to be an advancement in differentiation for these networks, or everyone says the same thing, and there's all they buy for dollars. Those that don't differentiate are going to just continue to lose share in the space.
They're going to have to differentiate, and they're going to have. You're purchasing an audience. You want to reach that person, ideally for what you're selling, whether it's clothing, etc., air tickets. You want to be where that audience is, and that's where the decision making is going to come in.
Yeah, and how does that a better investment versus where I could have spent that money somewhere else thinking I could reach that same person, whereas instead of thinking I'm going to reach
It
them.
might be too clouded, and I don't want to say the bigger names, but
Yeah.
there's so much advertisement. It's you're not reaching that right person. It's not a unique dynamic activation and an omni-channel solution. So I do think revenue is going to shift, but the agencies and the brands that are advertising are going to really need to find a way to make it an ease of transaction
Sure.
too. That's
Yeah.
another prediction I have, because if there's 500 media networks by 2026, like how do you choose?
Yeah,
And
that's-
is it just going to be the biggest player? Like, and that's just like publishing, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I know. I think that's exactly right. I mean, I know we're almost at time and ending it, but I think it's if you're not the biggest player, you have to. Those are imperatives you have to have, and otherwise, you'll just be another Me Too player. So,
exactly.
thank you for your time today. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you
us.
for
We really
having me.
appreciate
Thanks
it.
for coming.
Yeah, and thank you all for coming today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.